Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Serious topic? Let's do it. Teachers of Reddit, what's the worst thing you've seen a student do? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A different type of bad than most of these. I was a teacher at a poor inner city school. I had a lot of wonderful students, but some difficult ones. One of the worst, clearly bright, but was always sleeping through class and acting up and never doing homework. I lived about 30 minutes away. One night I stopped by the local Wawa after a night out with friends. It was at least 11:30 p.m. and I was already dreading the early morning drive to school. And who should be checking me out but my own problem student? He was working late to make money for his family, and then getting home at 1 a.m. or later before heading into school on 4 or 5 hours of sleep. He was a smart kid, really smart. I hope things worked out for him, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he'd been allowed to have a childhood and focus on his education. Early years educator specializing in children with SEN, special education needs, eating feces, no competition. Seeing a child chewing their own shit is something that stays with you. Having to try and hook it all out of their mouth with your finger whilst they bite you is something you forcibly forget. Children with complex sensory issues, particularly those with hyposensitivity to smell and taste, will often seek out particularly strong smells and tastes, and things that we find disgusting are not to them and instead are stimulating. Combined with the delays to their development, which means they are still likely to be at a stage of exploration where everything is tested in the mouth, this can obviously lead to situations that are very unpleasant to us. Stab another student in the back of the head with a pencil. Went in right at the base of the skull. Luckily it didn't hit anything important and just needed 3 stitches, but it was deep enough that it stayed in before the doctors took it out. There was a loud pop and a flash in the back corner of the classroom. I asked the student sitting there what happened. She said it was firecrackers. I sent her to the office. While she was still in the office, I realized the electrical outlets in the room didn't work. At that point, another student fessed up that the student sent to the office had put a pair of scissors in the outlet. I'm not sure why that student thought it was better to lie and claim she was doing fireworks inside the school. I was teaching for 3 months in a terrible inner-city school, London, UK. Terrible because the school's management was super ridiculous and refused protecting or standing up for their teachers. I quit after 3 months at the end of the first term. The school begged me to stay and promised me a pay increase. Here are some highlights. 1. A 15 female-year-old student pulled out a used tampon from her vagina during class and chucked it on my colleague's female face, telling her to effing shut up. A 16-year-old female student spat on my face while calling me an effing poof. The school's head teacher put her on detention for an hour as punishment, while the student was laughing at me saying, "You see, all I got is a free lesson, now F off." The school refused to suspend her and let me know that if I call the police to charge her with assault, they will support the student and refuse to acknowledge the attack to protect the school's reputation. A male student smeared his feces on a huge wall in the boys' toilet, writing shit with it. 4. A group of 6 to 7 students 16 to 17 years old surrounded a male colleague, pushing him from one to another. Took his glasses, very high prescription, rendering him practically blind, breaking them, then beating him and kicking him. The school refused to investigate as he couldn't identify any of the students. He couldn't see the faces without his glasses. He quit the school the same day. This place was a nightmare. When I was teaching preschool, I had a little girl between 3 and 4 walk up to another girl who was sitting on the rug reading a book, grab her by the hair and slam her head into the wall. They hadn't been interacting in any way prior. When I asked her why she did it, she said she wanted her to know it hurts. I was talking to a kid about Pokemon one day during their lunchtime. I'm the band director and a lot of band kids come to the band room for lunch. We were having a good time. He's a great tuba player, and I tell him I can't wait to see him tomorrow. He took a rope and hung himself in the last period of the day by kicking a desk out from under him. Luckily, the teacher he was with was able to somehow get to him, but I ran down in time, hearing the screaming, and was in time to see him hanging there as others try to support him enough to keep him from dying. Kid was gotten down, but that was awful. It's so hard to tell sometimes, even when you're right there with them, right before they try it. My favorite teacher at high school was a very kind and lenient man. Do your work, be respectful, and follow the major rules, and you and him would be cool. The one thing that would be super minor, but that he was very strict about, was taking a medication in any way or form in his classroom. One day, I needed to take some Advil for cramps and asked to take it. He said I needed to go to the nurse for permission. I ended up asking him why he's so strict on it. It turns out he'd had a student pass out in class one day at his former school. He tried to wake her up and called the nurse, but she wouldn't wake up. They called 911, and by the time they got there, she had died of an OD on narcotics she took in the bathroom that she had hidden in a Tylenol bottle. I don't know how we went back to teaching after that. My wife is an elementary teacher and has a kid this year that likes to slip under their desk and lick toes. We live in a warm state, and they all think he will grow up to be a creeper. I taught a student who was born addicted to various drugs, and at the age of 17 still had no coping mechanisms, so when he was stressed out, he would lean over and fart in your face. The day he graduated, I cried buckets. My wife has a few. This is only one during class. One girl was sitting with her hands in her lap, shaped like a bowl. Upon further inspection, I noticed she was collecting her spit in her hands. Said her name, made eye contact. Ugh. She drinks it and wipes her hands on the shirt. Ugh. She didn't make a move to ask to wash hands, so I sent her to. Ugh. I'm sorry for reacting the way I did while reading this, but it was disgusting to me. The thought, the idea, the image. Ugh. Worst? I had a student bully a kid into transferring schools, but then the bully got voted in as senior class VP. We have a kid who brought a gun, then planted a pipe bomb and more, still in our school. It's important to know if teachers told specifics, we can be fired for breaking privacy laws. Like those stories above, can never see the light of day and be associated back to the student. It's a three-way tie for me. Student 1, steal my class pet, a fish that I really loved, claimed to flush it down the toilet. Another student said they gave it away to a kid on the street in a water bottle. Student 2 raised their hand in a fist like they were going to hit me when I was visibly pregnant to see me flinch. They repeated this gesture 3 times. I wasn't their teacher. I just asked them to stop banging on the random doors and go to class. Student 3 put his finger in his throat and forced himself to throw up on the floor. I asked him why he just did that. He said to go to the nurse. Why didn't he just ask though? Why start with forcing yourself to puke on my classroom carpet? I quit teaching. The kids and their parents and the admin are raising a generation that isn't going to understand consequences. We are creating sociopaths. I also grew tired of parents screaming at me for the dumbest reasons. I didn't allow phones out in my class. Another wanted me to pay for her internet at home. And finally, I was not paid enough, yet I was expected to subsidize the education system. Saw a very sweet 16-year-old girl I taught for 5 years being strangled by her boyfriend in the hallway at school. I was viewing, and he got very aggressive with me, yelling in my face that it was just a joke and I should chill. As a woman, I also felt really intimidated by this teenage boy. I passed it on to the safeguarding team, and I'm not sure how they dealt with it, but I know the girl defended him. He got expelled for something else a few weeks later, and she told me that they broke up when he was gone. But I still worry about what kinds of relationship she's going to have in the future if she thought his behavior was acceptable. She deserves so much better. This was the worst thing I know of that happened at my school. Someone brought a blasting cap to school. Okay, that's a bit dumb, and flushed it down the toilet. That's really dumb. Then told the teacher about it, because maybe it wasn't such a good idea. Their best idea that day, really. Wound up with that team being taken out of service while the 4 fire departments and X-rayed the plumbing to find and remove the admittedly tiny explosive. It took several weeks before it was back in service. I teach at the college level, so the worst I've seen were a few kids hitting a weed vape in the back of the class. I told them that if I can't smoke weed in class, neither can they. They never did it again. Not really that wild, but college students are mostly boring in class. I taught college English literature and composition for 25 years until I retired a few years ago. I've caught students cheating on exams and plagiarizing quite a few times, at least a couple per semester. During every exam, I had students turn off their phones and place them on the desk face up. I always went around and checked their phones. During one exam, I had a student say she didn't have a phone. She was a single mom who had recently immigrated to the country, so it seemed reasonable that she couldn't afford a phone, and it didn't occur to me that she was lying. She asked to go to the bathroom during the exam, and I let her go. While she was gone, her name popped up on the course site and could see every resource as she looked at while she was out of the classroom for about 5 minutes. I let her finish the exam, but wrote to her immediately after and included the record of everything she'd viewed during the exam from her phone that she apparently didn't have. She claimed that she forgot she had her phone, and when she remembered she did have it, she was embarrassed to admit it, that it was in the pocket of her jeans, that it must have hit the course site when she was pulling down or pulling up her pants because it was the last thing she'd looked at online. I said I'm sorry, but I'd have to forward the evidence to the dean. She said she was going to appeal it. I replied that was fine, it was her right to appeal. Meanwhile, the dean's office contacted me to say that this was her 3rd offense. Because it was her 3rd offense, she automatically failed the course. It was sad because she had high enough grades to pass the course before the exam. So even if she'd failed the exam, she would have passed the course. I think about her often because I admired her so much for restarting her life with a small child in a new country. She would sometimes bring her young son to class if she couldn't get a babysitter, and she was very attentive to him, and he was very well behaved and never disrupted the class. Didn't see them do it, but it was such a catastrophe that I heard about it for weeks. The countryside Japanese junior high school I used to work at had one really rough year. When the 3rd years were 1st and 2nd, they were angels. As 3rd years, they were absolute demons. 4 male students in particular were stereotypical delinquents. They'd often just walked out of class and wandered out of school, smoked out behind the building, and stole or broke a lot of things. It was so bad, had to schedule staff who weren't in class to walk the halls to catch them before they did anything. Well, while the 2nd years were out in the gymnasium for PE, one of the 3rd year delinquents escaped and went up to their classroom, which had all their uniforms and gear laid out on their desks. He pulled the pin on the room's fire extinguisher and sprayed the entire classroom down in a pink foam. Everything was ruined. Saw a boy stab a girl in the eye with a pencil. Lucky for her, the pencil was blunt and he missed her eyeball and got the bridge of her nose instead. The boy bullied other boys and girls as long as they were smaller than him. I called the principal. The little girl had the pencil mark on her nose. Bro was taken out of the class, but sadly, there were no longer long-term consequences. I think he just got a talking to from the principal. The girl was more surprised than hurt. She did not even cry, but I was horrified. On another note, I remember Billy. Billy was a good kid doing well in school, then his parents decided to make him a boarder at the school. Billy's parents lived so close, you could see his house from the school, but he was no longer allowed to go there. He lived in the school now, like the other boardies, but he could still see the home he was no longer allowed to go to. His behavior went from good to bad. He stopped doing any work and misbehaved all the time. I was a teacher, but I also lived at the school, private school. One day, I walked past Billy, who was sitting on a stair and crying while looking at a picture he had held in his hands of his mom and dad. After a few months or a few years, he was allowed to be a day boy instead of a boarder. His mom and dad let him go home again, but Billy's personality had changed, possibly permanently. This was about 15 years ago. I hope you're okay now, Billy. A couple worked in a church daycare, and we were open to after-school kids. Starting with the more serious incident, there was a boy in our school-age classroom that needed an IEP and a floater because he was prone to violent outbursts, but the parents were refusing to accept that help, so all we could do was keep an eye on him. Usually that was impossible because of our school-age teacher was by herself, unless our other classrooms were ratio, and then I could help her. One of these times I was there, this boy grabbed a pencil and shoved it into another girl's eye. When asked why he did that, he replied that he just felt like it. Another incident with this boy, which caused one of my coworkers to quit teaching, was when he football tackled a preschooler. He was big and in 4th grade, and started to beat the shit out of him, causing the teacher to run and basically use physical restraint to keep him away from the kid until parents got there. He was expelled after this. Why he wasn't removed after the first? Well, I'd guess money, because this daycare was on its last leg and was closing in 4 months' time. On a lighter note, preschool during nap time got up and began sleepwalking. Freaked me out by myself in a dark, quiet room until I figured out that's what he was doing. About 8 years ago, a student was spraying deodorant in class. Teacher asked the student to stop, as that she and another student might be asthmatic and to go outside instead. The student paused for a moment, then sprayed it directly in her face. Teacher had an asthma attack and was taken to hospital. Student was given a stern talking to, but otherwise, no consequence. Here's a different variation. Even though this is at university level, there was a student who blamed a lecturer for the death of her friend, stating that the stress of her class made him have a seizure and die. She then started a campaign demanding her apology. The lecturer was devastated and ended up quitting. She basically ruined the life of someone and also kind of disrespected the life and death of her friend and his family, who were all sad about dying, obviously.